More than a century after the death of Oscar Wilde, his stories now leave us with his ghost that materializes before our eyes. His sarcasm and irony can be heard in his own voice when we are reading his stories, even in his darkest works. This acclaimed author, with his visual dandyism and the model of aphoristic wit, also left us stories that tell us about a more human terror, and actually more common than we think. Today, I will try to ghost terror by reminding you, or perhaps presenting to you, these ghost stories and the supernatural that Wilde left us. Lord Arthur's Crime. In Victorian times, there was an unbridled taste for clairvoyance and knowing about the future, and just this story is about how a clairvoyant reads the palm of Lord Arthur and then tells him that in his future he is destined to be a killer. Out of fear of killing his loved one, he decides to kill someone before getting married. You know, traditions. First, he tries to kill his aunt, decides to poison her, the remedy for any Victorian detective story. So he puts poison in what he tells his aunt is her remedy for her heartburn. Unfortunately, his aunt dies, but it's even more unfortunate that she died of natural causes, since the remedy was not ingested by his aunt. He goes for his next, or rather first victim. So Lord Arthur gets a little darker and aggressive. Then he decides to plant a bomb on the Dean of Chichester, which does not work for him. Overall, poor Lord Arthur decides not to marry to avoid killing his wife or future children. But then, coincidence, he gets to meet with the same clairvoyant once more on one of his walks. Who? What does he do? He throws the clairvoyant to the river Thames in despair. Alas, he's now a murderer. So now he thinks about getting married. Is that a happy ending? But what horror do we find in this story? The horror that perhaps we are not masters of our own destiny, that there is something more sinister that marks our future, like a prophecy or something. That same thing happened to Oscar Wilde. He went to have his palm read with one of the clairvoyants of the time, and it resulted in predicting him a ruined future. Unfortunately, that was true. Wilde had his last days in court scandals, unfairly losing money, reputation, and even his health, staying in exile. The Canterville Ghost. Possibly one of my favorite ghost stories. This story, filled with gothic horror mixed with scenes of irony, tells us about terrifying scenes of a ghost deambulating with chains. This is where the author presents a story where he mixes this world with a supernatural one. It turns out that the newly purchased Canterville Chase houses a ghost of a few hundred of years. The new inhabitants, an American family, arrives only to mock and ignore the ghost's attempts to chase them off. Failing to do so, the ghost makes one last attempt and once again fails miserably. Defeated and without sense of his life in this death, he is confined to one of the furthest rooms of the mansion. Virginia, the only daughter of the house, when she sees the condition of the ghost, she feels sympathy for him and finally decides to help him, to be able to cross over there or wherever he goes to achieve his exit from this material world. But how does this ghost, who not only terrorized people for years and years, but he also committed the capital sin of having killed his wife, end with this kind of happy ending? Well, Virginia helps him to forgive himself, and she forgives him. So he has served his sentence for all those hundreds of years. The terror here is, will our mistakes and evils come and terrorize us when our end approaches? The picture of Dorian Gray. Imagine that all your bad acts are reflected in a portrait of you. And now your portrait is possessed of all the evil that you have done. Would it be a good or a bad portrait of you? Dorian Gray, not to be confused with Christian Grey, although they are both very bad people. Well, Dorian Gray is a handsome young man who sells his soul to the devil, well, it's not actually stated who is this entity making a deal with Dorian Gray. The thing is that in this exchange, he wants his portrait to change and not him. The story tells us about how Dorian Gray, who was a former kind boy who was going all the time to make charity to the poor, now is corrupted by the idea of luxury and vanity, committing great acts that are considered heartless, like leaving his best friend Basil because of the bad influence of Lord Henry, and even breaking the heart of his loved one in a ruthless way, leading her to suicide. That, according to my interpretation and theory, I think he had to do with this alleged suicide, since in the end, he himself killed his own best friend. His twisted actions are reflected in his portrait, now aging as if it had been the portrait of a very, very old man, even looking like a monster. Again, Oscar Wilde speaks about being careful about the way we act. And the more terrifying thing here is that Dorian is a man who is corrupted. He killed, he's a murderer, and he is himself the owner of several vile actions. But even then, he's not immediately condemned or criticized by people. People only see his pretty face, so he must be good and kind. But her portrait does show the true horror behind his face. Is that really how most people get along and the people that we meet? Is it that people have a hidden portrait somewhere where his bad actions are reflected there? Well, we don't know. It is a great story that we can find from day to day normally, and that makes us readers reflect on our own actions again. I hope this video serves to encourage you to read or maybe reread some of these stories. So thank you for choosing to watch this video. Stay safe.